Hello and welcome to another lovely episode of Getting Defensive. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good afternoon, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I am so good it hurts. How are you?
I'm good. You dressed up for this episode, like with a button-down polo, and I'm just liking my.
I was torn on the bow tie.
You know, I try to wear my nice nerdy T-shirts for the show. So there you go. Just one more incentive. We might have some cat sightings. You can come see it on YouTube.
There are cats in the background. There probably will be cats on this episode. Yes,
that's true.
So, but before we go any further, I do want to remind everybody that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. And today we have a special guest, which I will hand it over to you to introduce.
Thank you, sir. And I want to welcome Derek to the show, Derek Held. Quick bio for Derek. Senior cloud security engineer who got a start in IT and security working at a public university, which, having done a little bit of work in IT and security at public universities, that is just a rat's nest of pain and torture and evilness. So that's a good way to get your start. He's worked in most everything in corporate IT stack, and these days focusing on cloud security, along with organizational security processes and standards at a multinational data service company. He's given a lot of talks and has got a lot of insights and thoughts on cloud security, which is probably where we're going to focus today. So welcome to the show, Derek. And what did I get wrong? What did I miss?
Nothing, and
Nice.
Happy to be here and excited to be here. I'm looking forward to our discussions.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So, you are a cloud security engineer by profession. So I'm curious about your perspective on what aspects of security most organizations seem to struggle with in specifically in cloud.
There's kind of an interesting intersection between traditional things that organizations struggle with in terms of change and running into those same kinds of problems in cloud. There's a learning curve there. And especially if you're coming from a company that has, for a very long time done run your own data center or co-load or something like that, making that transition to full service cloud platform provider, be it AWS, Google Cloud, whatever it is. There's things that you are used to in your on-premise colo environments, things like that just don't quite translate. The core concepts can be the same, like in terms of your security controls, the goals you have for those security controls, things like that. But the way that you go about them and how that attack surface is managed can be different, and teams can sometimes struggle with that a little bit because they make assumptions about we've always slapped a VPN on something, or we've always done it this way. And it's like, well, you've got new opportunities here, right? There's new things you can leverage. And so you combine that with, sometimes using certain technologies for the first time, like Kubernetes, right? Which has its own learning curve. And sometimes you get situations where people aren't quite sure what to do, and they fall back to habits and things like that, and so they end up kind of underutilizing the capabilities of the cloud platforms, which can frankly give you a lot in terms of security, right? Azure, obviously gets a lot of criticism for security issues and things like that, and that notwithstanding, right, like kind of the core of things like identity in cloud, right? There's things there when we're talking about identity federation, right, through OpenID Connect and things like that, that very few organizations would have ever been able to do in their own data centers. And it's provided for you as a service, and you just have to use it. So that's something that I think companies can really struggle with, that transition to changing their thinking about solving some of these problems.
Yeah, I, just to kind of echo, or at least kind of question a little further in that, in a previous role I was at, I won't mention who because I don't want to get sued. We were very much an on-prem data center, brick and mortar type environment, and there was this cloud first initiative. But what I kept seeing was just a lift and shift, like duplicate the environment in the cloud, but not leveraging any of the cloud unique specific capabilities. So it's like all you're really doing is shifting the workload, but you're not utilizing these cloud first functions that would really benefit you if you knew how. And for me, it seemed like we didn't have the skill set. Or the people with the skill set weren't at a level that was defining the architecture. Is that kind of what you're thinking and seeing as well? Or
yeah, and I think that also plays a little bit into you see sometimes companies will say that they don't feel like they're really getting the benefits from being in a cloud platform, and maybe they're shifting stuff back to a colo or things like that. Always kind of makes me wonder, right? Like, were they really maximizing the capabilities of the platform, or were they just treating it like an expensive server farm, which they'll bill you for it, right? Like, they're AWS, everyone's happy to take your money. But there, I think there's things that if you do that kind of thing where you're lifting and shifting and not really truly doing deep architecture for getting that true cloud native kind of approach, a lot of the benefits that are there, you're just they're kind of lost.
Yeah, when I was way back, when I was working for a cloud provider, we saw kind of two different profiles of customers. One was what we would think of as born on the cloud. They were kind of all in. They started native, Kubernetes, the whole way through. And on the other end, you had customers who just did just what you said, right? They're picking their existing workloads up as they exist in their current data centers, and they're shifting them to bare metal servers or virtual machines and whatnot. And I think, because this is something that I've paid attention to a lot, just given my role in working at a cloud provider. I have observed that I think there are certain kinds of workloads that are good matches for cloud, and some that aren't. Yeah. So as an example, like so first off, I think one of the most interesting innovations, other than like the extensibility and scalability components, is the interface, right? The APIs and the ability to manage cloud environments. But what I saw, when I'm starting to see in the industry, and I'm curious about your perspective on this too, is if you have a workload that's more or less static, like it's the same thing, last year as it is this year, and it's going to be the same next year. It doesn't grow, it doesn't contract, it's not variable. I think those are the ones that we're starting to see some resistance and pulling those back into, a colo or a traditional data center, because you are paying a premium, especially if you're using like platform type services.
Yeah, you definitely are. And there's definitely when you have those types of static workloads, right, there's only so many options you get in cloud for managing those costs, right? You can do your 3-year spend commits, some things like that. But once you've kind of tapped those out, right, that's it.
Right.
And that can be a place, especially if you have very, very heavy compute requirements. I've particularly noticed this on things that are very compute heavy. So not like, you know, smaller systems, but where you might have very large databases or things like that, where the types of virtual resources that you would be allocating in a cloud environment are, not the things at the start of the list, but the big 64 core things towards the bottom of the list. But where the capital expenditure costs of buying hardware and keeping that around for 5 years um, can be attractive, right? From a finance standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get it. There's kind of certainly a drive to cut costs and things like that. The problem that I think presents itself, especially if you're a company that wants to kind of have a hybrid setup where you trying to keep your elastic workloads in cloud and trying to keep those kind of big more static workloads in like a colo or something similar, is um, especially when it comes to like things like identity and trying to bridge the gap between those two environments. There's a lot more work that you really should do on that on-prem side that I don't think gets done. Um, and that's one of the benefits of if you just stay in cloud, it may cost you more, right? But you're going to benefit from being able to leverage more thoroughly cloud native identities and a lot of these security kind of concepts and foundations that the cloud platform provider just builds right in for you, that on-prem, hey, you gotta solo it, right? You might be
Mm-hmm.
using the same open source components as the cloud provider to do it in some cases, but you got to have someone who's going to own that service and own that type of capability on that on-prem side too. Otherwise, what you're going to find yourself having to do is kind of fall back to uh, kind of past approaches that you're just kind of losing that benefit, right? Like um, I identity is always a really big one for me because I think this is one that really gets not a lot of attention sometimes, especially in on premise where people are, well, we got AD and so we just have these service accounts. It's like, yeah, but like, what about extending that like more like into your application stack and stuff like that? It's like, well, I don't know. We just have a password and API key somewhere, and you're like, but it could be so much better, right? Um, and that's
Yeah.
what we get a lot of times in our cloud platform providers, right? We get these OAuth 2 based identity systems where we get portable identities that can be used in a lot of places and they can be federated. And I can use, an AWS role to connect into a Google Cloud environment or a Google Cloud Service account to be able to assume a role in an AWS environment. And even within these environments, we can extend these identities into databases, right? There's no database username and password that we're managing. We're using our cloud provider identity, right? Um, and if you say take your Postgres workload or your MySQL workload out of somewhere like your cloud provider and move that on prem, where's that identity portability now, right? You're gonna have to you got to set that up now, or now you're back to I've got to manage static credentials.
Hmm.
And
And now I've got multiple places to worry about shutting somebody down or
yep,
checking logs to investigate an issue, or yeah, it might be more expensive at a top line to run that in the cloud, but all these other inefficiencies add up that aren't always looked at from I think a finance team's perspective for sure.
One fun thing to do, I find, is when you're working with an engineer and they're trying to solve some type of authentication problem or something like that, and you just say, why, let's use the identity we already have, right? We have an identity for this workload. Let's use it. And they're like, we can? Like, that's something we can do? How do we do that? It's like, yeah, like we can. That's part of the benefit of like being here is we can leverage that. And MA, depending on the circumstance, it, varies, right? In AWS, if you have an API, right, that you want to leverage your roles with, right, you have something like API Gateway, where you can write an IAM policy based around your roles and control access to your API, and use that IAM policy to say, what identities or what roles should be able to do what actions against your API. And so there's no API key to generate there. You just use that role, and it's kind of cool to watch, like, oh, that's awesome. Like, I don't have to build a thing to generate credentials, and I don't have to add a new table to my database to manage them. So that's always a great thing, is like you can extend this farther.
And you're seeing a lot of companies don't necessarily know about this when they first go to the cloud, and so they don't take advantage, I guess.
I think it's a lot of it comes down to the engineers who are building our software, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of training do they get for cloud systems and understanding the services that they're using?
Sure.
A lot of what they're concerned about is, how do I make my service work, right? How do I, have clean code and understandable code, and, my build processes and things like that. They're not necessarily always trying to be experts in cloud platforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they may think that's, maybe not necessarily outside the scope of what they need to know about, but it's almost like a headspace thing. There's only so much information you can cram in there and have be top of mind when you're building your services, that it's easy to not think something like, hey, is there an identity solution in my cloud platform that I can use?
That makes sense.
So look, on the other side, of the spectrum, we've seen instances where that's gone kind of horrifically wrong. I think the major case study was Capital One a couple of years ago with AWS, and so without going into details on that, my question is, how do you avoid the pitfalls of that? How do you make sure that engineers and architects are on top of the best practices and know where those potholes are?
It's one of those things where I think that sometimes there's this desire to minimize resources, right? If we have fewer load balancer instances, things like that, like it's less stuff for us to manage. There's less stuff for us to worry about. But that, like the Capital One case, right? There's a little bit of danger to that, because the more centralized you're making these components, the fewer distinct identities that you have in play, the easier it becomes to have, misconfigurations, over permissioning, whatever it might be, that can lead to a larger attack surface than what you perhaps intended. And cloud platform providers, because of billing, right? Certain things are billed not just based on pure consumption, but you may have base hourly charges and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that plays into this as well, because hey, I want to reduce my hourly charges on number of instances that I have, and just worry about the consumption billing. But sometimes breaking those up and spending that extra cash helps you more, not necessarily more easily, but kind of more intuitively build in the barriers that are needed to provide that extra separation and protection that you need.
So what is the right way to think about how to approach that? Is that like through threat modeling, or what I'm not asking the question well, right? But how do you go about ensuring that you are not over consolidating?
I like to think of it from a service perspective, right? Like, what, like I have a particular workload, right? Um, One, just kind of understanding how that workload is run, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
it, am I containerized, like whatever it is, right? Um, Seeing how, like, if I apply one identity to that service, how many distinct pieces of infrastructure does that identity end up? Right? If I'm having, like, to make this service, and I mean like overall, kind of like an overall system, not just like my one little microservice that's running as like a Lambda service. Um, but just kind of my overall system that's doing some work, right? So if I gave that all one identity, how many different places does that identity end up, right? Is that ending up, oh, I've got it in a Kubernetes cluster here, and I've got it, in a serverless function here, and I've got it, I have to attach it to this other thing, here. Um, those all become opportunities to break that identity up. Um, in some cases, we can split in a way that uh, uh, is kind of even transparent to the developer, right? Like if you are taking, making the difference, making the separation between what is the identity of the compute that's running your service and what is the identity of the service that you're running on that compute. You don't want the developer to have to, or the engineer to have to worry about both, right? Necessarily, right? You want to minimize the things that they have to actually consciously think about. And that's why we do things like secure building blocks, and we try to, like, aggregate stuff to reduce that workload. But by throwing that piece in there, what's like, what, I'm like, just by default, right? Whenever a developer uses, say, this Terraform module to stand up this bit of compute, it's going to get its own dedicated identity, right? And that's going to be scoped to just what that compute needs to do, right? Because it, maybe needs to write metrics, like all this kind of stuff. Like it's going to have a certain amount of stuff that it needs to be able to do just as part of running as a compute instance. And then allowing the developer to then just worry about, okay, now you've got your application, you've got your service. Now you need to bring an identity for that, and we can scope permissions for that. And now I've already broken up. In that circumstance, there's still only one identity that the engineer has to worry about from their perspective. It's the one running the service. But I've now made it two. And I've now been able to give least permissions to both of those separately, right? And just looking for those kind of cracks in a service, for me, has been one of the easiest ways to find those opportunities and that's even before just getting into threat modeling, the identity abuse, and things like that. This becomes something that's a lot like that I don't have to explain, right? Like, because when we get into a threat modeling conversation, right, and I'm gonna have to like just trying to explain to someone who's never done threat modeling, um, you know, you can give them the basics, but to a certain extent, they're gonna be like, I don't think I know how to help you, right? Like they're like, I get it, like what you're doing, and it's cool, but like I'm not sure how to best contribute to this. And so but something as simple as, hey, your service should have an identity, and there's going to be identity that you don't have to worry about, you don't have to think about, and we're just going to have those things be separate. They're just kind of like, okay, yeah, I get it, sure. It's a much easier conversation to have.
Interesting. So, on the topic of identity, you recently gave a presentation at PancakesCon on cloud identity. What was the takeaway that you hoped people would get from that?
The big thing that I wanted people to see from that was we don't have to manage static credentials. Creating access keys for AWS users or service account keys for GCP users, like whatever it is, there's a better way, and that is using those native identity features in those cloud platforms. So if you're in GKE, right, you've got your GKE cluster running in Google Cloud, workload identity is right there waiting for you. It's a cluster feature, right? Generally it's going to default to on. I mean, you can turn it off, but I wouldn't say that's something you want to do. But leverage that, right? Instead of having to have this secret that, okay, now I've got to put it, I've got to store it in some secret manager, right? I've got to have some service like Vault or even just Google's native secret manager, right, where you're introducing these additional components. Workload identities right there. You can take a Kubernetes service account that you're assigning to your pod, that the Kubernetes cluster is managing on your behalf, right? You're not having to worry about how do I get a token for this Kubernetes service account. The cluster is doing that for you. You can take that token to Google and say, hey, I want a token for a Google service account, and through a couple lines of configuration, like 2 lines in your your Helm chart and like 1 line of IAM policy, you can do that. That's enabled. And so now I can use a Google service account in my application, and I'm not responsible for managing the credentials beyond permissions. So all of that credential material, I've kind of removed a lot from my plate in terms of handling that. And these are great tokens to use because they're time limited, right? They're good for an hour. Google Auth Library handles automatically refreshing them, things like that. But these are what you want versus I have a security key that is 7 years old that's been used since we first put this application in Google Cloud.
It probably logged 17 times. That could be leaked someplace.
Yeah, and that was the big thing is like just thinking about reducing the stuff that you have to manage and deal with, and leaning into the capabilities of the cloud provider to give you an identity and allow you to use an identity in a more secure way.
So I have not played with this, so I'm a little bit I'm a little abstracted from it. I kind of get the basics, but so you come up with this identity, and then I'm assuming you give permissions to other components of this identity can do X, Y, Z, and that's all it can do. And then it's almost like a public-private key pair that's established, or it's signing in with some sort of authenticator that says, I am this identity that is maintained and abstracted in the background. It says, oh, this identity can do X, Y, Z, and that's all it can do. Is that kind of the basics?
Yeah, it all goes back to OAuth 2.
Okay.
All of these types of things are all built on top of OAuth 2. Which is great because we have things like OpenID Connect, which is a layer kind of on top of OAuth 2 that gives us the portability that I was talking about earlier.
Right.
And that portability is what enables features like workload identity, because I can have this, this identity from the Kubernetes cluster, right? This Kubernetes service account. It has a OAuth 2 service that issues tokens. I can take that. I have a trust relationship between my cluster and Google Cloud. Google handles that, for you. And that allows Google's IAM services to do things like validate your token and, things like that. The important security checks that have to happen. And then that's in turn what allows Google IAM to say, okay, yeah, I've got a policy right here that says, this Kubernetes service account identity is allowed to impersonate me, this service account. So here you go. Here's your token, right? Here's your OAuth token that you can now use to talk to the Google Cloud APIs.
Interesting.
And Google, in fact, has really been, I would say, kind of aggressive in expanding the capability of doing this exact sort of identity portability thing. They've introduced in their IAM platform this concept. They refer to it as direct auth, which is, instead of needing to get a Google service account to interact with the Google Cloud APIs, I can take that identity that I've already been given from somewhere else and use that directly. It's something. It's not everywhere, so you can't accomplish every API action in Google Cloud for it. But certain things like Google Cloud Storage, right? Some services now allow you to grant roles based on that federated identity. So if I've got something running in like GitHub Actions or just somewhere else, right, where I have some other OAuth based identity that I'm able to use, I can just use that directly. I can say, yeah, here's my identity, and Google's APIs will go, yep, you're good to go. So I don't even have to do that transaction of getting a Google service account involved. I can skip that now. And so it even more streamlines that whole, federation process, that portability process. To it just takes it to a whole nother level, right? And now, there's minor benefits to it from audit logging standpoint and things like that, because now you're not having to kind of reverse the impersonation or look at the okay, I see this, but like I need to dig in and find out what the impersonating user is, and having to it's that constant having to go just one tiny level deeper to like understand, like I need to know what was really doing the thing. That's now gone because you're just using that identity directly, and so the logs are just here's the here's that GitHub identity, and it did an action against our cloud storage bucket.
Interesting.
It's a really great feature. It's the kind of thing that I I really hope to see Google really expanding on that, providing more capabilities. Um, a lot of what you can do now is resource based, so it uh, it only comes into play when you can give resource based roles within Google Cloud. So that's things like Google Cloud Storage that I used for my example, where you can grant roles at that resource level.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that you can do yet for like project level roles. Um, that's that would be the next big step, I think, for them in terms of capabilities of this. Um, but that would be huge for.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Really huge.
So
Interesting.
might be kind of a very broad question and maybe a dumb question, but like if you're coming in cold on this stuff, like what's the best way to start learning about these identity functionalities that are cloud native that people probably aren't leveraging?
That's a great question. That I probably don't have a great answer to
That's
because
okay.
the how I did it
Yeah.
was just sheer curiosity and wanting to know, and reading the Google Docs, right? Like just digging into product documentation and how does this work, right? How are these things
Mm-hmm.
connected, and just doing the reading. And not everyone is gonna be a like that's not gonna be a great learning tactic for everyone. I totally get that. Some people learn really well from just reading documentation. Some people are doers. They have to like get their hands on it.
Right.
Um, Thankfully, there are some ways that you can do that in very kind of low cost ways. Because having a Google Cloud Storage bucket, that's not going to really cost you much money, because that's a pure consumption billing type of model. So as long as you're not uploading 10 terabytes of data to it, right, like you're not going to have any meaningful charges that you have to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, like on the GitHub side, right, being able to set up an action and use the identity features there, you can do that very low cost.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so if you're a type of person who learns by doing something like that, right, like you don't really get billed for service accounts, right? So set up a GitHub action, try the different models. Do it through direct auth, right? Do it through impersonation. Um, there's a GitHub action that the Google team publishes, called, uh, unsurprisingly, Google Auth. uh, it's their their auth action, and you can they've done a lot of the heavy lifting for interfacing with their auth library, and your usage of it now becomes changing 2-3 lines of config when you call the action. And that can be a great way to see the differences in how it works and things like that. I've done that for people where just showing demos, right? Like, hey, here's my Google Cloud action here, or my GitHub action. Here's how it's configured. Here's how my bucket's configured, and it wrote a bunch of objects, and it did it without having to impersonate a Google service account.
That's cool. Although inevitably, as soon as I learn it, Google will shut it down because it's a Google
Yeah.
feature. So
I you know
worry about
I had an experience with that too, where I had a great win working with a team on leveraging a Google Cloud product, um, where we did a lot of security architecture work, where we did a lot of testing with the product, like hardware, and like shortly afterwards, I think it was within 6 months of us kind of having figured out some of these big barriers and figuring out performance considerations and all this kind of stuff. Google was like, "Yeah, we're killing that." And I was just like, "Wow, thanks, Google."
They're very well known for that sort of thing.
Yep.
So to change the topic a little bit, you had given a presentation at B-Side Seattle on researching data breaches through public data requests. So tell us about that.
Yeah, especially with ransomware, right? Like we just a constant, right, onslaught of companies and organizations getting hit. And in a lot of cases, right, these are private companies. You don't get the opportunity unless, someone happens to work there that, decides to give a talk at a conference or something like that. You don't really get the opportunity to peek behind the curtain. What did they do to recover? What were the conversations? How did things unfold? And people's memory is can do funny things, right? And so even someone trying to explain after the fact, sequence of events or whatever it might be, sometimes they might not remember, right? And short of having the type of technical document, right, your incident report or whatever it might be, because there's lots of artifacts, right, that you generate as part of the incident response process. Short of having those, right, where it has the direct extracts of logs or whatever it is, you don't always know, and things can be different when people are explaining it, because they may have different motivations for how they're presenting information to you. Maybe it's to make them appear in a better light or minimize some type of negative repercussion that they're afraid of, right, either from legal or regulatory standpoint, whatever it might be. But public organizations give us a very unique opportunity to gather those artifacts ourselves directly through public records requests. And if you are, making these requests in a state with very strong public records laws and protections that protect you as, a citizen, or just someone who's requesting access to that data as just being a member of the public, there's a lot you can get. There's some states where there might be tons of exemptions, try to reduce the amount of stuff they have to disclose. Thinking of some states like Florida and things like that can have kind of very not super progressive public records laws. But on the flip side, you have states like Washington, where like the baseline is you've got to release it, and the exceptions that they've drawn up are very narrow. And so for this project, there is a school district in local to my area that had gotten hit by a ransomware attack. And I wasn't requesting records to them, the week after they got hit. That's for one, you're not getting anything. They're just gonna, we're gonna get to that way later. Right. But about a year after, is when I started, putting in these requests, and it's fascinating, right? You're getting emails, you're getting text messages, you're getting instant messages, right? Depending on what, if they're using Slack, whatever, you're getting to see the real-time communications of how this unfolded and how they realized that this wasn't that, one server fell over and someone needs to go reboot it, but that something catastrophic has happened. And and you'll get mostly emails and things like that, right? I mean, that's in terms of records, the volume of records is going to be mainly communication, right? And that's going to be typically email. But those emails tell you a lot because people are getting stuff done, right? So seeing those conversations that are happening as they're occurring, as you're going through and you're looking at the timestamps, it's truly fascinating that unless you are someone who works like in incident response, it's not something that you would typically get to see.
This is why I tell all my guys, don't put anything in email that you don't want read in a public court.
Yeah.
Because it could happen.
Yeah.
So does this apply mostly to like public entities and like government entities, or?
Yep.
Okay. Or does it work for like public companies who have like, SEC rules to disclose, or is this more
government, like government,
yeah,
public?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I requested and of course received was the report at the end of all of the incident response and all that kind of stuff, because they had to bring in a third party, and of course I have all the emails, so I know who they're bringing in to do what work and what tools they're using. I also just requested the incident report. Like I want the copy of the final report.
Wow.
And so it's great to be able to read that. The information that they uncovered. And it's kind of funny to being able to tie some of the information that's in the report back to other records that you received. I unfortunately didn't quite get a copy of. I tried, but I wasn't able to get a copy of the actual ransom note. I knew who they sent it to because they called local law enforcement. And so I was trying to get so I got part of the note. I was trying to get more of the note. And so I was trying to essentially play the strategy of requesting the same record from different agencies to see if there was a difference in redactions, so that if the school district in this case redacted certain information, but then the police department didn't, then there's I don't have to go try to argue whether or not it was a valid redaction. So that is another thing you can do, is as you see other places that are public entities that they communicate with, you can then go request records from there. And it was interesting because I learned not only about what happened in terms of discovery of the incident and how they were triaging and handling the response. They set up a conference room, for example, that they could sequester their technical people in, their engineers, to just heads down focus on stuff. But I actually learned about other data breaches at other like public organizations, because there's whole big groups of education IT people. They share a lot of information between each other. And now I have some of those records of them sharing information between each other. And so what started off as me just digging into one data breach turned into, oh hey, here's someone talking about another data breach in another school district, and they say here's a link to this report that we put together, and I click the link and it works. I can go and I can see extra information, right? And so it's just kind of funny, like just how it was totally unexpected to find out some of these things. I was like, okay, so that they had a data breach, they had a data breach, you know, um,
So
yeah,
did you find that they mostly provided all the information up front, or did you have to keep going back for more?
my requests were I started off with some very broad requests. I knew from their public directory who their IT people were,
Uh,
so I started there, right? Give me the IT director's emails for the 2 weeks,
oh,
just
okay.
starting just before the incident to just after the incident.
So is this like a state equivalent of a Freedom of Information Act request
Yeah.
kind of
Yep.
process? Okay.
Um,
So yeah.
so I start with these very broad requests,
Yeah.
and then looking through the literal thousands of records that get pulled back, I then narrow down, okay, what is it I'm looking for, right? Because now I've got information about vendors and things like that. So now I can say, hey, I would like to see the invoices for all the invoices for the last year, like with this vendor. So now
Wow.
I can see how much is it costing them for remediation, right? How much, some of it's, obviously some of it's getting reimbursed by insurance. That was one of the things I asked for, was claim forms for their cyber risk insurance. Um,
Do they
and
charge you like per page returned or anything, or
no, in
okay?
my case there weren't many charges.
Hmm.
Washington State has uh, like I said, the public records laws here are very angled towards the public.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are quite a lot of limits to what they're able to charge for.
Hmm.
Um, like it's there's kind of very narrow circumstances where they can charge for anything for the process of like just getting you the record.
Interesting.
A lot of the fees that they're allowed to charge are for things like paper copies, things like
Mm,
that, where there's more of a material cost. Um, and they can also in certain cases charge for some work that is needed to like redact or prepare a document
Yeah.
for release. This can be something that really shows up a lot with body cam video. Like if you're requesting body cam video from a police department, it can be time consuming to process the video and blur faces and things like that.
Hmm.
sure.
And so there are charges that are permitted for staff time for doing those. Um, but it's very good that it's uh, kind of angled towards public disclosure, because it does make stuff like this a little easier to do without having to like fork over $150.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I'm just like I've done a couple of FOIAs in like at the federal level, and
Hmm.
I'm just thinking through this like that would be a fee, that would be a fee, that would take 6 months, that would be a fee. And so I was
Yeah.
like, wow. Um,
Yeah, the agencies in Washington have to, not only is there kind of just narrow carve outs, they've really got to be able to defend the fee, right? Like, because even in a court situation, um, like the agency, if they were to, improperly withhold records, or,
mhm.
uh, you know, redact something improperly, or it charge you improper fees. There's a big burden that's placed on the agency to not only prove that what they did was correct, but in the event that they don't do something right, um, the financial penalties that are levied, uh, you know, like can not be insignificant, right? And so there's definitely a motivation on their part to kind of err on the side of disclosure versus, trying to drive hard on, no, we can't release this or that, claiming improper exemptions, because then they got to cover your, court fees and lawyer fees, and there's fines for how long they withheld the record from you, right? So if Solve drags out over 2 years, they get charged for those 2 years that the court process played out.
No kidding.
So it's certainly helps with states like Washington in making these types of requests.
Interesting. So I've not done this on either side from a public entity perspective, but I'll tell you what you described is very similar to what a lot of us go through in a discovery, right? In the wake
yes.
of a in the wake of a breach or a lawsuit or something like that. So, one of the things that you were talking about is something that I think it bears repeating, and I think it was Andy that actually said it. When you have an incident going on, and whether you're a public entity or not, it's really hard to say what's going to happen. But anytime you create a record, right, it lives forever, generally speaking. And while you don't want to hide stuff, when you have people like wildly speculating or making like crazy assertions, like, I told them that they should have upgraded the firewall, or whatever, like you end up having, you can really live to regret some of the stuff that you said. And so I think it's really good advice, again, not from the perspective of hiding things, but like stick to the facts, especially in written records. If you want to like wildly hypothesize because you're trying to figure out what went wrong, get on the phone and do that. But don't lie, don't speculate. That's Jerry's lesson.
Defensive writing.
Yes.
Yep. Defensive writing, the fun training you get to take that talks about exactly that,
Right.
Be careful what records you create, the statements you make in those records, right? It's not to prevent you from vocalizing concerns, right? That's not the point. The point is to, phrase your statements in such a way that you're not, to your point, Jerry, right? Like, you're not going way outside the facts of the situation or applying emotion into a statement that, it's just not needed, right?
Yeah.
Especially when taken out of context by a third party.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you end up having to explain it, right? That's and it may not
what
be
I meant was
well, this is also why whenever we get an incident starting and start investigating, I put pretty early in my document, I think Jerry did it. And then we just go forward and see what happens. And then
that way in discovery, if someone pulls that out,
right?
Yeah.
It hasn't happened yet, but I'm waiting. But it's interesting. It's also like, I've worked for a bank in the past. One of the policies the bank had was all emails were automatically deleted after 90 days unless they were covered by a legal hold.
Yeah.
And, they said it was to preserve, drive space, but no, it was to hey, that's automatically gone.
Yep. That is definitely to limit liability. That happens a lot. If anyone's ever working somewhere and you're wondering, like, why, like 90 days, 6, like, why is everything getting deleted after like hardly any time? That's why. Limiting legal liability. Because if you have a data retention policy, right, that states, hey, we only keep emails for 6 months, and that is the default retention, then in a legal process, right, when you're doing discovery, you have a defensible, allowable reason for why that record does not exist. Right? Because it got deleted. We don't
It
keep
is
it.
not your
We didn't set out
right.
to destroy,
Right.
evidence or something like that, which obviously would be very bad and gets you
Mhm.
into very big trouble. Judges do not like that. Um, but if you have a global policy that is applied automatically,
Right.
constantly, right? Like that's,
Good
you know,
point.
that's the not really loophole, but that's, that's a permitted, that's just like, okay, yeah, you don't keep email longer than 6 months. So that's all we get.
So I think we're running out of time here. This was a really awesome discussion, and I appreciate you being here.
Definitely.
Thank you for
Before
having
we
me.
absolutely before we cut it off, is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with? Anything that any particular causes you care about? Any places you'd like people to come and learn more about you?
Sure. If there's one thing I hope people take away from this is, when it comes to cloud security, um, really look to leverage what's there. Dig into the documentation, right? Watch the videos, whatever it is, however you learn. Take the time to dig into what's there, because that's how you're going to get the benefits from being in cloud. That's how you're going to get the security benefits. That's how you're going to get the architecture benefits. Whatever it is, you just got to take the time to research the materials, research take time to learn.
Mhm.
um, and that's going to go a really long way to when you're having conversations with people, and you're talking about how to set up some service, design the architecture for a thing, being able to recall that information, and then and even if you don't remember exactly off the top of the head where you can find that doc page, but enough of the terminology and the components to go re-find that doc page, that you can now share and
Yeah.
share that knowledge, and because now it's not just you that learned the thing, now it's everyone you just shared that with, right? Like, you become a knowledge multiplier within your organization, and by being able to have those conversations, and now you've just made everyone better, right?
Yeah.
um so be the change, as it were. Right.
I hear. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I also hear one thing behind that too is be willing to try something new and different that you haven't tried before because it might be better.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely, without question.
Sorry, I interrupted you, but
No, yeah,
um,
no, that was it.
other.
That was all I had.
um, where can people find out more about you, or if they want to get in touch or say hello?
I'm on InfoSec Exchange, so Derek Held at infosec.exchange. You can find me there. Um, don't don't follow me if you're hoping for lots of technical musings. That's not how I choose to use social media. If I do love giving talks, though, so anytime I do have that wonderful opportunity, I always love to post slides, make slides available. So the two previous talks that we've kind of talked about on this call, I've got those slides online. Um, I might need to relink them, so I'll kind of see to that, because I used to have them linked on, we'll say, the platform that shall not be named. Um,
Fair
so
enough.
I'll make that available. I'll just I have a website, derekheld.com, that I usually
Okay.
mention these types of things on. So I'll go make sure I've got links, current active links, to those slide decks available for people.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll put links to that on our website at gettingdefensive.com. And people will be able to see and listen to this recording. So thank you again for being here. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. This
Yeah.
was fantastic. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks. All right. Just to close this out, if you want to follow Jerry, he's at jerry@infosec.exchange. I'm at Lurg on both the site now known as X, might be Y next week, I don't know, and InfoSec Exchange. And if you like the show, tell a friend. We're trying to get this format off the ground. We're still getting our feet under us. We're still learning, so hopefully apologize for any warts on the frog, as it were. But it's a new format. It's a new feed. It's on YouTube. It's on its own podcast feed. If you like it, tell a friend. If you think somebody else is cool out there that you should talk to, let us know. We're trying to find awesome people like Derek who are in the trenches doing the work, actual technical expertise. We kind of shy away from the marketing and the sales folks. No offense to those guys. We're trying to get more technical folks
the
to
doers,
talk to. So,
as Home Depot likes to say.
doers, right. So let us know if you know somebody out there that Jerry and I's special brand of cynicism could add some value to. And with that, have a great week. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.